The journey to establish middle schools in America is a story most Americans probably do not know, yet it represented a crucial turning point in the education of young adolescents. Though the story has roots dating back to the turn of the 19th century and the start of the junior high school movement, the journey that is our focus began in July 1963 when Dr. William Alexander, noted curriculum authority, delivered a speech at a junior high school conference held at Cornell University. In what proved to be a landmark address, Alexander proposed a new school in the middle, with its own status in the K-12 vertical system of American education, to replace the junior version of high school. Alexander's speech provided a catalyst and is considered to mark the start of the middle school movement. It has been, however, the motivation, determination, and commitment of the participants of this project, as well as countless other leaders and practitioners, that have sustained the middle school movement. Many middle-level leaders have expressed their belief that Alexander's proposal resonated so positively with American educators because the social and historical context of the 1960s provided a ripe environment for change. As Tom Erb explained,
the whole period of the 1960s was a period of social questioning, agitation, and change. It was an opportune time to try new things.
America was in the midst of the Vietnam conflict and the civil and women's rights movements.
John Arnold, another early contributor in the transition to middle schools, described the historical context as more open than it is today. James Beane commented that it was a good moment in terms of the possibility of change. More specifically, Paul George recalls that it was a time of liberality in education and the freedom that came with the 1960s.
Conrad Toepfer compares the educational context of the 1960s to the first decade of the 21st century.
Well, I think beginning in the 1960s, there was a sense of hope in this nation. There was an innocence and naivety that a lot of terrible things in the world have blotted out. There was a confidence and there was a trust. And people looked at things non-judgmentally, but with open minds much more, I think, in education. There was a relationship between parents and educators that is not there anymore. I see it's a very antithetical relationship today. That the teachers are criticized almost immediately for anything what they're doing, and it's always the teacher's fault, so it seems. But back and then there was a sense of participatory democracy, in which if you came up with an idea, it said, this might be better for young people. John Lounsborough said, better for kids. It's a great, great line.
Tom Gatewood further illuminates the importance of the timing of Alexander's proposal.
You know, that was like the 60s, maybe into the early 70s, where a lot of questioning was going on. Questions about our government, questions about our leadership, questions about war, questions about education. A lot of things were being questioned. Being on college campuses in that time and being part of that was an energizing, exciting time, you know, to live because everything was up for grabs. Literally every institution was under attack. Was being questioned. So middle schools came along and they provided a solution to the answer to one of those questions about what do we do about this junior high issue.
Many of the middle school leaders cited here were young professors at the time of Alexander's proposal. The 1960s were characterized by revolutionary ways of thinking and real change in the cultural fabric of American life. Young people were not content to follow in the footsteps of the generation ahead of them. They wanted change. These changes affected education, values, lifestyles, laws, and entertainment. Tom Dickinson described it as a period where experimentation was something that was going on in the schools, and that Alexander's ideas found fertile ground in the social and political climate of the time. In addition to the context of schooling and education, Joan Lipsitz notes that at this time in the history of the world, the study of early adolescence was a non-field. Early adolescence was not being studied in the context of education, nor was it being studied in disciplines such as medicine, psychology, or sociology. Joan states,
It was amazing to me that you could have an age group that everybody knew was important and that nobody was willing to pay attention to.
With a missionary fervor, emerging middle school advocates involved themselves in an effort to rescue young adolescents from what Silberman called the junior high school wasteland.
From the start, the middle school philosophy was driven by an ethical or moral commitment to respect and respond to the developmental needs of young adolescents. This commitment led to the belief that they deserve their own schools and programs, designed in response to their unique needs and characteristics.
The middle school movement arose, in part, because at a time when Americans were open to change, especially social change, middle-level educators like Alexander recognized deficits in both junior high schools and the upper grades of elementary schools. He recognized that many of the components he proposed for the new middle school had their roots in the rationale used for the junior high school movement, but that the implementation and the application of these components had been lost. Alexander and George wrote that junior high schools became in time almost duplicate copies of senior high schools in terms of credit and grading systems, methods of teaching, time schedules, and student activities.
It would be an oversimplification to assume that the only reasons middle schools became prevalent was dissatisfaction with what the junior high school had become. Rather, the reasons middle schools became prominent were varied and complex.
Middle schools grew in popularity in large part as a response to shifting demographics, including the need to find room in public schools for the offspring of the baby boom that were causing overcrowded conditions in elementary schools. In addition, in some cases, establishing or restructuring schools to middle schools became a means to comply with desegregation mandates. School districts could desegregate their middle schools as they transitioned students from their segregated elementary schools.
While practical and political forces increased the prevalence of middle schools, they were not the primary forces that influenced the belief system that shaped the middle school movement.
As a true grassroots innovation in American public education, middle school education was not conceived from a single specific philosophy or theory.
Because of the varied backgrounds and experiences of its early leaders, the middle school philosophy has roots in several academic perspectives, including developmental psychology, democratic education, and core curriculum, all of which were grounded in progressive education. As middle-level educators began to meet together at conferences and institutes, they brought to these gatherings their own perspectives, influenced by their backgrounds and experiences. At the same time, they began to build a collective identity around a set of shared beliefs. As this collective identity developed, educational organizations began to dedicate time and attention to middle-level education and to commission statements and reports about the philosophical and practical aspects of establishing developmentally responsive middle schools.
In 1975, the Association for Supervision and Curriculum Development Working Group on the Adolescent Learner published The Middle School We Need, written by Gatewood and Dilge.
In 1980, the National Middle School Association, under the leadership of John Swaim, commissioned a writing group to articulate the shared ideals of their organization, and in 1982, the first edition of This We Believe, the official position statement of NMSA, was published.
In 1985, the Middle Level Council of National Association of Secondary School Principals published An Agenda for Excellence at the Middle Level. In 1989, the Carnegie Corporation of New York issued Turning Points, Preparing American Youth for the 21st Century, a landmark report which recognized the need to strengthen the academic core of middle schools and establish caring, supportive environments that value adolescents.
This We Believe has been revised and published in 1995, 2003, and 2010.
In 2000, Carnegie Corporation issued Turning Points 2000, Educating Adolescents in the 21st Century, by Tony Jackson and Gail Davis, an in-depth update of its 1989 report.
As evidence of the far-reaching impact of Dr. Alexander's contributions to American education, the New York Times published a lengthy description of Alexander's conception of middle schools on the occasion of his death in 1996. In the text, Alexander is described as an educator who was a leader in the movement to supplant conventional junior high schools with middle schools that provide young adolescents with a smaller and more intimate educational environment. Further, the writer states that Dr. Alexander became convinced in the early 1960s that most conventional junior high schools had become rather static, being modeled on programs at senior high schools. Alexander suggested the concept of junior high schools be changed to middle schools that were designed to be more responsive to the needs and interests of young adolescents. He and others began to advocate specific programs and other ideas for middle schools, and in the decades since then, thousands of middle schools have been established around the United States. Now that the middle school movement is almost 5 decades old, it is most appropriate to examine its origins and development. The future of middle-level education is now in the hands of new and emerging leaders. Every person who is involved in middle grades education has a role to play in its continued success. Every teacher, teacher-educator, parent, policymaker, administrator, mentor, citizen, and student faces the challenge to build on our rich history and to chart new courses for the future of middle-level education. The context was right in the 1960s, and the context is right today in Milledgeville, Georgia, and back in your home districts and institutions across America to establish new paths and plans for middle grades education.